Thank you for coming out on a beautiful night. I have known Sirote for many years. She's much younger than I am. We were together in Muncie, and her husband was a Talmud in my yeshiva, and his parents were members in my Shul. And I always admired his taste in women. And the author is a very special woman. She has a personal journey of her own, but aside from that, she is a wonderful and great scholar in Torah and in Tanakh, and a very wise person in life. She began a number of years ago writing a weekly blog regarding the Haftorahs of the year. And after a period of time, I told her that I thought she should make a book out of it, because I think it could be of immense value, because of the fact that the Haftorahs that Chazal chose to accompany every parsha of the Torah have a special meaning and give special insight into the Torah itself. We make a bracha on the Haftorah, Asher Bochar B'Nviim Tovim. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave us prophets who were good people. The rest of the world has prophets, perhaps, but they are rarely good people in their personal lives and how they treat others. But the prophets of Israel are Nevi'im Tovim, because if they're not Tovim, they cannot be considered amongst the ranks of our prophets. And Divreim Anemorim Be'emes, the words of the prophets were spoken in truth. Truth does not change. Truth is not relative. It's not current. It's not necessarily politically correct. Truth is truth. And therefore, at a time when the non-Jewish world forbade the Jews from reading from the Torah on the Sabbath, so Chazal, in their wisdom, substituted a reading from Nevi'im that would characterize the message of the Torah and would give guidance to the Jewish people in very severe times. Now, we are no longer forbidden to read from the Torah, and we have been forbidden for perhaps 1800 years. So then why do we continue to read in the Haftorah? Now, there's three reasons. One reason is that the Shul makes money on maftir. The second reason is Shema Yasir Adover L'Sura. All of Jewish history tells us that what once happened can happen again, in spite of all our protestations to the contrary. So therefore, we have this, so to speak, in our pocket, that if God forbid the Torah reading is again interrupted, the Nevi'im will remain for us. But the third reason, perhaps the main reason, is because the Haftorahs have value in their own right. They speak to us. They talk to us about our situations. They explain to us what is happening. And aside from the fact that it is the most magnificent prose, probably, in the Hebrew language. I mean, the Navi Yeshayahu or Amos are unmatched in their use of Hebrew, which itself is a great teaching lesson. Aside from that, the values that they speak of, the ideas they present, the vision that they foretell for us, the goal that they set for us, it's of enormous, enormous consequence. And especially in our time, when unfortunately the study of Tanakh is no longer a primary subject in many of our schools, even yeshivot and girls' seminaries. Now the women are in much better shape than the men. Generally speaking, that's true. But as far as Nevi'im are concerned. But in our time, so the Haftorah come to remind us. Come to remind us of who we are and why we are and where we're going and what we're supposed to be doing. What God wants from us. In the words of the Novi, Mo Hashem Elokim Shoel Mimcha. What does God ask of you? So he put it in these simple things, Asos Mishpat, to deal justly with people, Avas Chesed, to love good deeds, V'atznei Alecha Sim Elokecha, and to walk humbly with the Rebbeinu Shalom, not to be arrogant. So all of Judaism is summed up in one verse. What does God want from you? How do we translate that verse into action? So we have mitzvot. And so we have taken Ahavas Chesed and concretized it. There are laws of tzedakah, there are laws of Bikkur Cholim, there are laws of Nichum Avelim, there are laws. And Asot Mishpat, so we have a whole Seir Nezikin. There's laws of Beinonim V'Chavero, there's laws in business, there's laws in behavior. But there are no laws for Hatznei Alecha Sim Elokecha. That's left to every individual. How to walk humbly with God. So that message of the Haftorah itself has a greatness to it. So what Kira has done here is she's taken the Haftorah and taken the values of those Haftorah and put them in English, a readable and understandable, and I may say beautiful English, so that our generation and our children and grandchildren in the English-speaking world will have an insight into what the prophets wanted to tell us. And that's of inestimable value. And therefore it's a great pleasure for me personally. You know, Muncie produces great people. It's a great pleasure for me to present Kira Sirote here, and she will discuss her book. And the book is on sale after lecture, and she'll be happy to sign a copy for you. In 200 years, the signature is worth money. So Kira, please.
Thank you so much. To say that this is an honor is, of course, an understatement. And to say that this book would not have happened without Rabbi Wein is not at all an exaggeration. Because even with all the encouragement, Rabbi Wein was one of the first people to tell me to write it, and one of the first people to ask every time our family spoke, Kira, where's the book? When I did actually put something together, it wasn't even looking for a publisher yet. Somebody called my husband Yossi, in fact, about something that he had written. And Yossi said, well, you know, this word thing that I'm working on is not really ready yet. But my wife wrote a book, and the gentleman said, that's nice. And Yossi said, well, Rabbi Wein would write a foreword. And he said, really? So it literally would not have happened otherwise. And there's a big difference between a email and an internet and an actual physical book. So truly, truly, I'm grateful. Before I start, this book is dedicated to my parents in their memory. And in the dedication, I tell a little story that I'd like to tell over to you now. I am originally from the former Soviet Union, from Kiev. And my parents, growing up, were not allowed to study Hebrew. They were not allowed to celebrate the holidays. And they never actually opened the Tanakh in any language in their entire life. And neither had I. And when we got out, one of our first stops was in Vienna. And the Jewish agency there in Hayas made sure that we had a place to stay, an apartment shared with several families, and an allowance for food. And they gave us a Bible translated into Russian. And my mother had this way about her that when she would get a book, she would open it to the middle, read a little bit, and if she liked it, she'd go back to the beginning. So she opened this Bible to the middle, at random, and this is what she read. I will say to the north, give over, and to the south, do not restrain. Bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. So she looked at me and she said, that happened. Indeed, the north had let us go, and ultimately, when we came to America, my parents made it a point to send us to Jewish schools, even though it is not easy on any level. But they said they tried to steal our tradition from us, and we're going to get it back. So we did. But and then the rest of the verse also came true. Bring my sons from afar and daughters from the ends of the earth, because all their 11 grandchildren live here in Israel, and they were here and they retired here and they passed away here and they're buried here. And they saw their children learning Torah and speaking Hebrew and celebrating the holidays. Yes. And from them I learned, among other things, that the Tanakh is not talking to somebody, it's talking to us. Anyway, so this is in their memory. Right. So the Haftorah presents several challenges to the average Jewish person. There is the language, which is not easy. As Rabbi Wein pointed out, it is poetic, and sometimes the poetry is not easy to understand, and the words are not easy to understand, and it's sometimes not easy to understand who's talking to whom and if it's good news or bad news. That's just the language. In addition, unlike the Torah, the Chumash, where the Torah reading goes week by week, nice and orderly, the Haftorah is like a wild ride. You never know where you're going to find yourself. 1 week you're in Melachim, the next week you're in Yeshayahu, now we're in Yecheskel, and the Nevi'im, the prophets, span 800 years of Jewish history. And the section of the Haftorah that was chosen usually is not even at the beginning of a story. Often it's in the middle, doesn't tell you what happened before, doesn't tell you what happened after. And if it's a prophecy, an actual message, it's often not in the middle, the beginning of the prophecy, but the end of the previous one. And you have to be a really pretty solid expert in Tanakh to just open a random chapter and know exactly what's going on and why. That's another issue. So in order to solve these problems, I did two things. First of all, this had originally been a class that I presented, and and it was in English. And I said, well, I'd like people to appreciate the poetry of the language. So what I'd really like to do is to present it in poetic form according to the Tamei Mikra, because that is the punctuation that we have in the Tanakh. So I'd like to split it up according to the Tamami craft, in poetic format, and then there should be a translation. But there weren't any translations that were phrase by phrase. They're linear, verse by verse, but not phrase by phrase. So I wrote my own. And if I'm already writing a translation, I'm not going to have these and thous and wherefores and beholds. It's going to be in the English that we speak. Because just as Hebrew has moved and shifted, English also. It's a living language and it's shifted quite a bit since the translations of previous generations. So it is translated and it is formatted. I'm actually quite pleased at how it came out. You'll see actually in your, if you go to the first page, don't read too much, but you'll see what the formatting looks like. So it's actually very pretty. So that's the first thing I did, as a new modern translation. The second thing I did is before every Haftorah, there's an introduction that tells you who the prophet is and what period of history he's talking in, and which audience he's talking to. Is he talking to Yehuda, or is he talking to Israel? Is it, or as we're going to see, somebody else altogether? And that historical background allows you to appreciate the message of the prophet, because otherwise, Yecheskel this week is going to be talking to Egypt. When, where, and how, and why. So there's a historical introduction as well. So that gives, and in front of every section, I have a few words describing what it is you're about to read, so that as you read it, even if the translation, even so, is still poetic and obscure, at least you know who is talking to whom. Okay. So that's on the level of being able to understand the actual Haftorah. And then I did something else, because the question that we always ask is, why, of all the chapters in all the 24 books of the prophets, why was this particular section chosen for this particular parsha? And the choice is not random, and the choice was made by Chazal. Some of them go way back to the times of the Mishnah. Their Mishnayot, the reference, in Zachor we read the story of Amalek with Shmuel and Shaul. So it is Chazal who made that choice. And even some of the ones that were shifted later on, maybe the Rishonim. So this is not a choice that was made at random. So it requires an explanation. And there I had, and I don't want to just be able to say, okay, this is about Mitzrayim, this mentions Mitzrayim, we're done. It's not what I was looking for. So there were two things that I was able to use in order to figure out something a little bit deeper. One is the Medrash itself. There are many Midrashim that make their point by using a verse from Nach and a verse from the Torah. And then they make their point. Now, often people who are just reading Medrash, they kind of skip over the Psukim, and they say, yes, I understand the point. But the truth is it's the Psukim that make the point. And very often we have found that the Medrash brings a pasuk from the Haftorah and a pasuk from the Parsha, and we'll see an example of that this week. The other thing that I was able to use is similar to the Midrashim themselves. There are phrases that are, some phrases in the Torah are more rare than others, and there are some phrases that are repeated in certain situations. And then if we find that a rare phrase appears in the Torah and in the Haftorah, we say, maybe that is what they have in common. Let us put those two things together and see what that perspective gives us. With a specific theory that I had, that if you look at the Haftorah from that point of view, the Haftorah itself is then a parish on the Parsha. And we shall see that also in this week's Haftorah. Okay, so let's start. First of all, the prophet here is Yecheskel. Yecheskel did not live in Eretz Israel, he lived in Bavel. And he was exiled with Yechoniah Melech Yehuda, along with Mordechai's ancestors, before the actual destruction of Beit Hamikdash. And his task was to provide the voice of God, the perspective of God, to the Jewish people in exile who did not have the internet, and they did not have WhatsApp, and they did not even have Jerusalem Post to try to figure out what was going on back in Eretz Yisrael and why. I wish somebody could explain to us what is happening and why. This prophecy in Yechezkel is shaped like this. This is the structure. He says something nice to the Jewish people about how the Jewish people are going to be prosperous and healthy. And then he turns to Egypt, and he tells Egypt that God is out to get them. We're going to read that in a second. And then at the end, a few more verses about how good things are going to be for the Jewish people in Israel. Now, from this we learn two things. First of all, the prophet talks to Egypt, to Mitzrayim. That tells us that God actually has something to say to the nations of the world. Sometimes we think that there is us, and God cares about us, and the rest of the world can just disappear for all that he cares. That does not appear to be the case based, at least, on the Tanakh, which is what we have to work with, which is what God has told us. It is not the case. We're going to see just how much that is not the case. So he cares. He cares about what Egypt says. Now, a little bit of history. Because this prophecy was given in the year about 560 BC, and that would be about 1,000 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim. So we like to think that, Yetziat Mitzrayim, we left, it's over, we never looked at them again, we never cared about them again. But that's not actually, that was not the political situation. Even at the time of Shoftim, certainly, and even at the time of the kings, Egypt was a superpower. It was the civilization. And this area, we were their neighbors, their satellites. We're not really independent countries, even when we thought we were. We're always in relationship to Mitzrayim. And they saw us as, oh yes, those cute little people over there on our border. And that was fine until the north, somebody put it this way, if Egypt is here, then the north is over there, right? Assyria sure came, and they started conquering everybody to the degree that they were threatening Egypt themselves. So then Egypt came and tried to fight them, and guess where they walked past? Here. And then the Jewish people in the middle, right? So the kingdom of Yehudah said, oh, I have an idea. Let us make an alliance with Egypt against Assyria. They're going to protect us. But guess what? Not really so much. And Assyria came, they conquered the northern kingdom, they conquered most of the cities around Jerusalem. Jerusalem barely was saved through miraculous means. And where was Egypt? They withdrew their troops. And that happened yet again. So Assyria left, and then there was Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar started coming to Shul. So again, Egypt went over. They lost the battle with Nebuchadnezzar, came back, meanwhile made this area their vassal. And once again, every time that Nebuchadnezzar would threaten to take over, the kingdom of Judah, the kings, went to Egypt for help. And Egypt was not there. They did not stand by them. And that is what the prophet is upset by and what he's angry by. And that is what they're going to get punished for in a few years, as the prophet actually tells us in a little while. Okay. So we're not going to read the whole Haftorah, just this little snippet to get a sense of the terms and to meet the crocodile, because I said there'd be crocodiles. Okay, so source number one, the Haftorah of Va'era from Yechezkel. I'm just going to read the English one. Speak and say, so says God Hashem, I am unto you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great crocodile, lying in his Nile, who says, the Nile is mine and I made it. I will put hooks in your jaws, make the fish of your Nile stick to your scales. I will raise you up from your Nile, and all the fish of your Nile will stick to your scales. Skip the verse 2. and all the residents of Egypt will know that I am Hashem, for they were a brittle crutch for the house of Israel. As they took your hand, you slipped away, you tore their shoulders, they leaped on you, you broke away, and you caused them to stagger. So that is what Yechezkel has to say to Egypt. Now, why the crocodile? So before I answer that, there's a verse, it connects to a verse in the Parsha, right? When Moshe and Aaron go to meet Paro in this week's Parsha, it says the following in source number 2. When Paro speaks to you, we'll ask you to give a sign. Tell Aaron, take your staff and throw it in Paro, and it will become a crocodile. So why crocodile? Okay. So first of all, there are other countries that use, let's say, bears, or eagles, or lions. Crocodile seems a little bit, primitive. But those who have met crocodiles know that they are incredibly powerful, that their jaws can tear apart any animal, that they can swallow it and digest it, bones included, and leave nothing behind. And they know that they are ancient. They've been around since the beginning of the world. And they're not going anywhere. None of them are endangered in any way. And they also live a very long time as individuals. And they're very territorial. Their land is their land, and nobody is coming to take over. So the power of the crocodile became the symbol for the nation of Egypt, to the extent that they apparently would mummify them and embalm them, probably not in that order, embalm them and mummify them the way they would do to humans. And this little picture that I brought here and it was on the flyer is an Egyptian artifact that there's just a little bit on the top of the front page. It's an Egyptian artifact that represents a crocodile. Actually, it was a crocodile. So you can imagine why a crocodile would say, "The Nile is mine, and I made it." And then you could easily imagine how the kingdom that identifies with the crocodile would then say, "The Nile is mine, and I made it." And then we can imagine what the Ribbono Shel Olam would say, the creator of the world, would say to somebody who believes that the Nile is theirs and they made it. In fact, we don't have to imagine. We have a medrash, and source number 3. The medrash is on the pasuk of from this pasuk in Shemot. Take your staff and throw it in front of Paro, and it will become a crocodile. Hashem said, "This arrogant villain calls himself a crocodile," as it says, the great crocodile. Where does it say that? In the Haftorah. Okay. Go and tell him, you see how the staff is a dry stick and turns into a crocodile and can move and breathe and swallows all those other staffs, but eventually goes back to being a dry stick? Yeah. You too. I made you from a stinky drop of liquid and I gave you the kingdom, and you boasted and said, "The Nile is mine and I made it"? I'll turn you back into tohu vavohu, nothingness and chaos. You swallowed all the staffs of the tribes of Israel. I will cause you to disgorge all that you have swallowed. So this is the attitude that the Egyptians had, and this is the response of the prophet, as it were, and of the response of the Ribbono Shel Olam, who doesn't care that it's 1,000 years. Yes, to him it's all one. And to us, really, it's all one. The Egypt that Moshe spoke to, and somehow the Egypt that Yechezkel spoke to, ends up being one and the same. So the thing is here, the Medrash is saying that God wants to teach Paro a lesson. And the Makot are coming to teach Paro a lesson. That he does not rule the world. God rules the world. And that takes us to something else that I noticed. And this, frankly, I think you would only notice this if you were translating. Because as I was translating the Haftorah, I found myself repeating the same words over and over again. I said, wait a second. I already said this. I already translated this. And here it is again. There are, in the Haftorah, in source number 4 in Yechezkel, there are 5 verses that say the phrase, V'yadu ki ani Hashem. They will know that I am Hashem, their God. Or they will know that I am Hashem. The first is addressed to the Jewish people. The last is addressed to the Jewish people. But the middle 3 are not. The middle 3 are addressed to Egypt. Apparently, it is important to God that Egypt knows that He is Hashem. So important that we, the Jewish people, are the framework. We're the first, we're the last. But the middle, the meat of the sandwich, as it were, is them, not us. And here's the really interesting thing. The same thing happens in the Parsha. In Va'era, in the beginning of Va'era, there are the same phrase appears twice, and then again later. So in the first 2 that are on this page still, the first is addressing the Jewish people. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you will know that I am Hashem, your God. That's the Jewish people. But the second one, also in the beginning of the Parsha, it says, yes, but there is a second purpose to the Makot. And Egypt will know that I am Hashem when I stretch out my arm over Egypt. It is important that they know. Okay, that's the introduction. But then the structure continues. And source number 6, there are 3 more verses. In this you will know that I am Hashem, so that you will know I am Hashem in the midst of the land, so that you will know there is no one like me in all the land. Each of those are addressed to Egypt. And the final one, source number 7, is again to the Jewish people, ending the framework. The first to the Jewish people, the middle to Egypt, and the last, so you will tell your sons and your grandsons what I did to Egypt, and you will know that I am Hashem. But the middle, with the Makot, those middle 3, are not just there at random. They're not sprinkled throughout. They're actually really, really structured. Source number 6 is titled B'tzach Hadash B'achav. Unlike most things that there are 10 of, there actually are 10 plagues. You can identify which the 10 plagues are. That's not true for Aseret Dibrot because there's an argument about how to count them. There's no such argument. The reason that there's no such argument with the 10 plagues because they're really, really structured. They are a grid. So, and what makes it a grid is the phrasing that it uses. For instance, each one of the triplets, right, the tzach, adash, b'achav. So dam begins with bezot teda ki ani Hashem. You will know that I'm Hashem. And the second one says bo al paro. The third one says neteh b'cha. And then the second set, in Arab, it says leman teda ki ani Hashem. You shall know that I am God. Dever, the second says bo al paro, go to paro. And the third one says, take something and do something with it. And the third set as well. Barat says, yes. The second, Arba says, Bo al Paro. And the third, 1, 2, 3, like that. Right? So it creates a structure that each of those 3 have, within each plague, there are 3 different kinds of plagues. And then there's the other structure that perhaps we're more familiar with, that the first set, Dance for Deakinim, are applied to the water, yes? Arav Dever Shechin are to the area where people live, like at the ground or near the ground. And the last 3, Barat Arba Choshev, are in the sky, yes? So we have the earth, the land, and the sky. With the point being that God rules over all of these things. The earth, the land, the sea, the earth, the sky. Yes, and part of that, in each of the three things, there's a repetition 3 times. In each of those, you will know that I am Hashem. One for Dam, for Tetzach, one for Arov in Adash, and one for Barad in Ba'acha. So it seems that not only is it important that the Jewish people know Hashem, not only is it important that Egypt knows that He is Hashem, but it seems that the entire purpose of the Makot, one might even say the entire purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim, in the way that it was made, the way that God chose for it to happen, was so that they will know that He is Hashem. They would. Now, here's another thing. What does it mean to know that He is Hashem? And it uses the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. You should know that I am Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, usually we say Yud Kei Vav Kei is it's the name having to do with the verb Havaya, existence. Yes, usually translated as existence. So usually we say Yud Kei Vav Kei Haya Hoveh V'Yeh. The was and is and will be, and sometimes it's translated as the eternal. Now, this presents a problem, because if you think about it, in what way does God's eternity, right, how does that show that He rules over the world? Right? In fact, ancient philosophers had a very hard time with the concept. They believe that God is internal and therefore unchanging, and therefore He cannot possibly rule over the world, He cannot possibly change anything, cannot possibly interfere. So they made separate gods. And the Hindus, they have a separate one for that. They have a separate God who created, and a completely different God that makes things change and makes things happen now. Because it really is not the same thing. Well, there's actually a pasuk in this 6th parsha also that shows you a different way of looking at the verb havaya. And source number 8. Hinei yad Hashem hoya b'miknecha. I'm reading in Hebrew because it's very hard to translate. The hand of Hashem will be upon your flock. And this is Dever. So, will be upon your flock. Will be what upon your flock? In English, the verb to be is a transitive. You are, you exist. I am, this is a book. Yes? But according to Rabbi Wein, from whom I heard this in one of the Yemei, in the name of his father, in Hebrew, apparently, there is a transitive version of to be. It's not to be. It's not the hand of Hashem will be upon your flock, and there it is. No. It is the hand of Hashem doing things, causing things, making things happen upon your flock. Yes? Yad Hashem hoya, not haya, hoya amiknecha. And in that case, the name haya hoveh v'yeh doesn't mean was, were, and will be, not the eternity. It's the power. God made things happen, He makes things happen, and He will always make things happen. Not only that, He's the only one. And that, by the way, right, it's power, it's lordship, that is why it's translated as Lord, and that is also why we haven't pronounced that name in a very, very long time. No one's heard it pronounced since the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. So instead we use a different word. We use Shem Adnut. Why? Not at random. Like we think, oh, well, it's good enough, it has the same sound. No, because it means the same thing. What we use, and I can say this because we're learning, Adonai is Shem Adnut, is the same thing. It is the one who has made everything happen, who makes everything happen, and will continue to make everything happen. That is the Shem Adnut. And the plague of Dever, which, by the way, is singled out in the Haggadah, I don't know if you noticed, Zed Dever. Why? Because Yad Hashem hoya b'miknecha. That's when we learn what that word means. That's when we learn what God's hand can do, or rather, that His hand can do. That he's not the creator who walked away and left everything behind, but rather he is the power and the only power. So then, when we make a bracha, for instance, when we say Baruch Atah Hashem, yes, Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Shakol Niyah. I'm thinking Shar Baruch because I said it that way. Shakol bara lichvodo, never mind. Yes? What we are saying is, he is the one who made everything happen, and therefore he rules the world, and therefore he is our God. And how do we know this? V'yadatam ki ani Hashem. We, the Jewish people, were shown. Atah horeita ladat, it's a different parsha, but even so. In this week's parsha, we were shown that God runs the world, the sea, the earth, and the sky. And there's nobody else. And all of those things are under his control. And then but it is not enough if we, the Jewish people, know that. The entire world needs to know that. The superpower in Egypt needs to know that. And it seems that, well, they learned their lesson then, but 1,000 years later, when Yechezkel speaks, he has to remind them again, because apparently they forgot. That's not unreasonable for them. However, the Jewish people cannot forget. We're the framework that holds it all up together. We're the beginning and we're the end. And through the fact that we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, what are we saying? The Hashem that caused everything to happen and still causes everything to happen, there's only one of him, there aren't several. There's no God of good, God of evil, God who created the world, God who keeps it going, etc., etc. Much easier if it were, but it isn't. So we keep that in our consciousness because of our brachot, because of Shema, because of the parsha that we read, because of the Haftorah that we read. And through that, the crocodiles of the world who say, I am the Nile, and I created it, and the world is mine, and I get to choose who I support and who I leave, and I don't actually care because it's all me anyway. So they might forget, but it is our job as the Jewish people to remind them. V'yadatam ki ani Hashem. And there's one more thing. In source 9, there's a rather puzzling pasuk in the Haftorah, in the parsha rather. Right at the very beginning, which is what is called Ba'era, it says, I appeared to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov, Ki El Shaddai, Be'el Shaddai, which is one of the names of God, refers to the fact that he provides for everybody. And my name Hashem, I did not let them know. Shmi Hashem lo nadati lahem. And the obvious question is, wait a second. They use the name of Hashem. Abraham says, Hashem Elokim b'mei dakir Hashem. It's not that they don't use, they know the name. What does it mean that they don't know? Well, if what we have here, right, if Hashem is the one who makes everything happen, he is the God of history. He is the God that affects which superpower rises and which superpower falls and when and why. And the Avot, they lived personal lives. And they set the foundation for the national level, but they were at the beginning of Jewish history. They did not live to see these things happen. And there's apparently, according, the pasuk comes to tell us, I'm sorry, they didn't know, they didn't see, they didn't feel what it was like to see the God of history in action. But you will. Yetziat Mitzrayim did, and the Jewish people certainly have. Certainly we have seen that God controls history in ways that we, only afterwards we look at it and say, how? Or we look around today and we say, how? So V'yadatem ki ani Hashem is the message of the parsha and is the message of the Haftorah. Thank you.